Ambassador Limbert, the hostage crisis anniversary was marked by demonstrations in Iran. What do those demonstrations tell us about the state of politics in Iran right now?
You're right. Yesterday was exactly the anniversary, 34 years ago that the embassy was overrun. And I mean, you can read them in different ways. I would like to read them as kind of a last gasp of the ideologues. To say, okay, we're still here. You have to deal with us. We're a force to be reckoned with. But frankly, events are passing them by, and it looks like things are changing in Iran. And there's a new spirit. People talk of moderation. Even the supreme leader talks about heroic flexibility, which is another word for moderation. So I think things are changing, but anytime things change, there's always going to be a group that wants to hold on to the old way. So I call it the last hurrah.
So if things are changing, how serious is the threat posed by Iran in the region and to the U.S.?
Well, that's always a good question. My own view is that the talk of the Iranian threat to us or to our allies has always been overblown. It's not a regime that we like. It does things that we do not like, but its ability to threaten us or threaten our friends, frankly, is quite limited.
How would you characterize U.S.-Iranian relations now compared to 34 years ago?
Well, 34 years ago, until April of 1980, officially, we had relations. I mean, the relations existed between the two countries, and the officials from the two countries could talk to each other. For 34 years, they were in a deep freeze. There were almost no exchanges, and what exchanges they were basically threats and insults and name calling, and sometimes worse. It was an estrangement, 34 years long. That within the last couple of months, since the election of President Rouhani and the changes that have followed that in Iran, things seem to be changing, and perhaps that long freeze is finally thawing out.
John, looking at the recent events in Benghazi, what does that tell us about the safety of the diplomats around the world? Has it gotten better or worse?
It's a good question. It's probably no better. Unfortunately, we live in a world in a very dangerous world, and our diplomats very often, my colleagues, they go to difficult places. They go to dangerous places because it's important that we be represented there. On the other hand, there are times like Tehran 34 years ago or Benghazi last September 11th, where frankly we probably shouldn't be, at least in the numbers that we are, and maybe where the situation is simply too dangerous.
What did the hostage situation do for the Iranian people, looking back now through the prism of history?
Well, to most of them, there were a few who made good use of it politically. I mean, they saw this as a way to advance their own political careers, but that's a very small group. For the majority, it was not a benefit. The outcomes, in a word, were extremism, violence, brutality, and even I would say the Iran-Iraq War, because I don't think Saddam would have ever attacked Iran as he did in 1980 if Iran had not isolated itself from the world. I mean, Iran had a long defense relationship with the United States. Its military equipment was American. Its training of its people, its pilots were all American trained. They were excellent. Until the embassy was seized, we and a lot of people within Iran were interested in maintaining that relationship, keeping it going. Had the Iranians done so, I'm not sure that Saddam would have had the nerve to attack Iran as he did. So the outcome was on the domestic side, it created inside Iran a climate of lawlessness. It made moderation an insult, a dirty word in the politics, and created a sense of lawlessness and extremism and brutality that Iranians are still dealing with.
Although Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is skeptical, do you see Iran reaching out more to the West in an effective manner?
It's clear that they are. It's clear that they are. One can argue about the motives and why they're doing it, but frankly, in diplomacy, what's less important than the motives is, in fact, what they are doing. That they are willing to talk. They are willing to talk in a way they have not been for 34 years. Remember when Secretary of State Kerry met with his Iranian counterpart, Dr. Zarif, in New York last September? That was the first time that the two foreign ministers of the two countries had met in 34 years. Now, the last time they met, back in 1979, it was a disaster. The meeting was a disaster. But this meeting, by all accounts, was much more productive.
Looking back 34 years to when the embassy was seized, what are the lessons learned from that period of time as it relates to U.S. foreign policy in Iran?
That's a very good question. If we had about 3 hours, we could go through it. My favorite lesson, my lesson out of that is that when we and the Iranians sit down together, when we're together in a room, and this is not unique with Iran, there are also ghosts in the room. They're the ghosts of history are there. The ghosts of 1953, the ghosts of the Shah, the ghosts of the ghosts of Stalin is in the room. Ghosts of Truman, Eisenhower, all of Mossadegh. All these ghosts are there in the room, and you can't ignore them because if you ignore them, they're going to haunt you. I mean, we just passed Halloween, so we know about ghosts and haunting. But we better not ignore them. We better deal with them. And there is a history out there. There is a history out there, and it matters to people. And we'd better understand it. And when we take decisions on both sides, we had better take that history into account.
You don't see the U.S. and Iran being endless enemies, do you?
No, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we didn't talk to the Soviets for about almost 20 years after their revolution. We didn't talk to the Chinese for a little over 20 years after their revolution. But eventually, we established relations with Moscow. President Nixon went to China, and we established relations. 34 years. We have a big in Cuba. We don't have relations, but we have a big intersection, and we talk to them. We talk to them regularly. 34 years is a long time for estrangement, but in politics, nothing is forever. Nothing is forever. I think if you listen to what the Iranians say, even some of the more ideological ones, even they admit that this may not be forever, and that the situation could change.
Ambassador John Limbert, thank you for joining us.
You're quite welcome, Dick. My pleasure.